Hello and welcome to The Season, the podcast from FYCit that goes behind the scenes of award season. I'm your host, FYCit founder Ryland Aldrich. If this is your first time tuning in, The Season is where we explore the inner workings of awards campaigns with the people who shape them. Last week, we kicked off the season with an insightful conversation with Katie Rich from The Ankler, and today I'm thrilled to have Hugh Fink joining us. He was the longtime executive producer of the Writers Guild Awards and an Emmy-winning writer for Saturday Night Live. We'll be diving into his insights on running an awards show and hearing some of the great stories from his time in the industry. But first, let's catch up with what's been happening this week in the awards world. We mentioned last week in our conversation with Katie Rich that The Life of Chuck was the first TIFF Audience Award winner in over a decade without distribution. It's been reported that perennial awards powerhouse Neon has scooped up the film by Mike Flanagan. However, it appears they're eyeing a summer release to launch a campaign for next season's race. So that's one less film to worry about squeezing into your calendar this year. In other news, the deadline for countries to submit their entries for the Best International Feature Oscar has passed. We're expecting a final approved list from the Academy soon. Anyone out there taking the challenge of watching all 90-plus international submissions? If so, drop me a line at podcast@fycit.app. I'd love to hear how it's going, how you plan to do it, and maybe even have you on the pod to discuss it. Adie Bryant is returning as host of the Independent Spirit Awards next February. She did a fantastic job last year. The awards will once again be streamed online after switching away from TV a few years ago. This means no commercial breaks. That's great for viewers at home, but maybe not so ideal for the folks in the room who use these breaks to grab a drink and do a little mingling. On the FYC side of things, the list of studios actively listing screenings on their awards websites is now up to 6, with Paramount joining the fun since last week. This is changing daily, so there could be even more by the time you hear this. Meanwhile, Amazon MGM announced nearly 100 screenings this week for such films as Challengers, Nickel Boys, Blink Twice, and The Fire Inside. These screenings are stretching all the way to January 2025. So for those of you who've already bought next year's calendar, make sure to pencil these in. It's getting busy out there, and we expect even more contenders to start popping up soon. So make sure you're checking the FYCit app daily for updates. And if you're an awards voter and not yet using FYCit, head over to fycit.app to get the latest updates on all the screenings and events as the season heats up. And with that, let's dive into our interview with Hugh Fink. Hugh Fink is a stand-up comedian and a celebrated writer. He got his start writing for some of the most famous comedians in the 90s, including Dennis Miller and David Spade. He was notably a writer on SNL from 1995 to 2002, for which he was nominated for numerous awards, including winning an Emmy for writing in his final season. Since 2015, Hugh has served as executive producer and writer for the WGA's Writers Guild Awards. The Writers Guild Awards will be celebrating its 77th annual edition on February 15th of next year. So Hugh, how's your season?
The season is good. Of course, I like to look at the shows that precede the show I usually produce to see what they do and how they do it, because I get the advantage of going later in the season.
Talking about your award show history, your earliest credits include writing for the ESPYs and the MTV Video Music Awards. Can you tell us a little bit about your early experiences at the award shows and how they link to your current role with the Writers Guild Awards?
One thing I learned with that experience, Ryland, was that you have to write stuff that's going to appeal to the live audience. People watching at home might interpret things differently, but especially with comedy, you have to get laughs with the live audience. Otherwise, it's going to make the show look really bad. So, for example, the first award show I ever worked on was the ESPY Awards. Dennis Miller hosted it. It was at Madison Square Garden. And you had these rabid New York sports fans. So any joke that they thought was at the expense of a team they hated or a player they despised, they would applaud and laugh. Any joke that made fun of a New York player or a New York team, they'd boo. So that was just an eye-opening experience to me. As a sports crowd, especially for an award show, is so partial that when doing humor, you better be careful what you write.
So you have a real background in stand-up comedy. How common is stand-up comedy backgrounds for award show producers?
Very rare, honestly. I don't know of any others besides myself. I think there's sometimes people who produce award shows may have been comedy writers, perhaps, but I'm the only one I know of who actually has had a long time career as a stand-up.
Do you see that as an advantage when you're writing the jokes?
I do. I think that having a sense of pacing a monologue and knowing structurally what's going to work does give me an advantage. It explains a lot why when you're watching the Emmys or the Oscars or the Grammys, sometimes the jokes fall flat. I think that the producer may not have an understanding of that these jokes aren't going to play to that audience.
Maybe we can step back just a little bit. Can you explain the difference between the different kinds of producers on an award show, how that might differ from just a writer?
So there's always a creative producer on an award show. I would define that role, which is what I do on the Writers Guild Awards, as every decision that affects something creative on the show. So that would be not just the writing. It would include the writing. It would be choosing the host, choosing the celebrity presenters, choosing the look of the set design, choosing the music that's played during the award show, and then obviously choosing the order of the show from beginning to end to structure it in an entertaining way. Then there's a producer on award shows who have nothing to do with the creative, and their job is nuts and bolts. It's making sure that all the celebrities are picked up in their limos on time. It's making sure that all the clips and audio that you're showing and hearing during the show are cleared legally. It's making sure that the seating is proper, where studio executives and VIPs and all that is handled correctly. Those are issues that I don't deal with.
How many producers total on the Writers Guild Awards?
On the Writers Guild Awards, there's only 3 producers. If you look at the credits for, the Emmys, Grammys, you're going to see a lot more.
And are there additional writers as well, or that all falls to you?
Thank God there's additional writers. I hire them. There's about, I'd say 3 to 5, depending on the year, but at least 3 other writers besides myself.
So when does the process for an award show start? Is that something that you're spending months and months going through or year round? How does that work?
To my knowledge, Ryland, the only show that starts anywhere close to year round would be the Academy Awards. I think the other shows don't need that much time. So for example, for the Writers Guild Awards, we don't really kick in until 4 to 6 weeks before the actual live show. I think for the Emmys, the Grammys, other shows, it could be a couple months before.
So in that 4 to 6 weeks, you're doing everything from bringing in the host to, like you said, deciding on the order of awards and the music and the presenters and everything. That all happens in that 4 to 6 week sprint?
That's correct.
Wow. Is it really just a full on sprint from the beginning of that, or does it ramp up and get really nutty in the last few weeks?
The latter. It ramps up and gets nutty. And particularly what makes it get nutty is when you book the show, people start canceling, which is always going to happen. But, even a week before the show, you may feel that you have all your presenters locked, and then suddenly 4 or 5 people pull out, and you've got to quickly decide who to replace them with. That doesn't always happen, but it does happen.
What is the order of operations there? What's the first decision that you make when you start producing the show?
The host. Because I feel like tone-wise, the show is very much going to be defined by who the host is. In the case of the Writers Guild Awards, obviously, I'm only looking for someone who's capable of being funny. So I'm thinking, how will their persona, monologue, etc., affect the whole show?
What comes after host?
After host would be, at the same time, honestly, once the host is locked, is any pre-taped or live comedy bits, which maybe the host is a part of, maybe the host is not a part of. But that would come next because those things are just challenging creatively to write and produce and have the time to do. Next would be, I would say, the presenters.
And are you writing jokes for both the hosts and the presenters? And how involved are they in that process?
It depends on the host, Ryland. For example, if Patton Oswalt is hosting, he's not going to write the jokes himself, but he's going to be very hands-on in picking the jokes very clearly, which ones he wants and which ones he doesn't. If Lisa Kudrow's hosting, she's not a stand-up comic. So she's very reliant on the writers coming up with the material. And then it's sort of a discussion with her on, hey, we really think this joke would work. Will you try that one? So it depends who the host is, how much input they have.
Does the host selection process start with just a long list of people you'd love to have? Is it looking back at who's hosted in the past? Tell us a little bit about that selection process.
Right. It starts with a wish list of, for that particular year, who are the sort of most interesting, hottest, impressive comic personality / comedian who you'd want. And that's a long list. And it's sometimes an unrealistic list, meaning, yeah, we'd all love to get this talent, but we know 99.9% of the time they're going to turn us down. But we'll put them on the list anyway. And then once I approve the list, it goes to the Writers Guild leadership to make sure that they don't have any issues with any talent who I suggest. And that does occasionally happen. There could be someone who I think would be great, but the Guild has its own reasons to feel that person wouldn't be the right choice. And then we have that approved list. Then our talent producer, and you asked who are the producers on the Writers Guild show. One of the producers is the talent producer. Their job exclusively is to book the show. So they'll start reaching out to the talent based on my preference of order of who they should go to first.
It seems like hosting has become a fraught role in recent years. There's been a narrative around the fact that if a host bombs, it's bad for their career, but if a host does a great job, it doesn't really help. Has it become harder to book hosts? Do you think that narrative there's some truth in that?
I definitely think there's truth in that. I think I have the advantage with the Writers Guild Awards because it's a prestigious award show, and yet it's not televised in the way that the other shows are. That makes people who might normally not want to host be more willing to host because it's appealing to them. It's a room full of talented, hip writers and agents in the industry. And if you're the right personality, that could be a great audience for you to score with. However, if you're hosting some of the other award shows you mentioned, there are a lot of downsides to doing it with very little reward.
So speaking of that, some have quipped that the Writers Guild Awards are the most entertaining awards show that aren't televised. Can you tell us why that is?
I'll go further. I'll say it's the most entertaining award show, period, and should be televised. But yes, the reason is because people don't have to care about what they're saying in terms of censorship. And in terms of comedy, they can really go for it. They can do hard, edgy jokes that speak to truth and are irreverent and maybe on some award shows would be considered inappropriate. But on the Writers Guild Award show, it's sort of a great evening of comedy. So there's an acceptance to the type of humor and jokes that are done.
So you're writing for the fact that it's not televised then?
We actually are. That's true. And they do show clips of it online. So obviously there's a threshold where the WGA cares about the content. They're not just going to say, hey, say whatever the hell you want at all costs. It's not that. But there's definitely more flexibility knowing that you're not going to be televised.
And are those conversations ongoing with the TV networks? Is there a chance that it would be televised, or is that something that the Writers Guild would prefer doesn't happen?
The Writers Guild would actually be interested. Sadly, there seems to be, and I've been through this several years, when we have those discussions with traditional networks and even, other destinations, there's this doubt of how many people would be interested in watching the Writers Guild Awards if it were broadcast. I think what they're missing is if you see the list of talent who's booked for it, it's pretty darn impressive in terms of the A-list comedy talent.
Sure.
So I certainly think comedy fans would watch it.
Would that bum you out a little bit if you had to tone down those jokes?
That's a great question. It would be maybe a mixture of financial gain with creative loss. So I could live with it.
Right.
But yes, it would bum me out a bit.
When you're writing the jokes, what percentage of them get in? Are you throw everything at the wall kind of writer, or are you thinking like this one 100% will be in?
I'm pretty strategic about it, meaning initially I encourage all the writers to throw everything at the wall. There's no limitations, just go for it, whatever you think's funny. Then, we whittle it down and get rid of stuff that we think is either too mean or dated, or maybe it's been done before, but we sort of use those parameters. And then, the host is going to have a say. I have my opinion on what jokes the host should do. They may not agree with all my choices, and that's okay. But it's a matter of negotiating so that enough of the jokes that my staff and I believe are the ones that go with get in, along with some of the jokes that the host might champion.
Is that your experience that's pretty much the same with all the award shows, even some of the bigger awards that have the bigger shticks or pre-produced packages?
Yes, although it really does depend on the network and who the host is. So, for example, the year I produced the ESPY Awards with Norm Macdonald as host, and I produced it with Lorne Michaels, there was clearly a real disconnect creatively because every single joke that Norm Macdonald did in his monologue was approved by the network. right? They had to see those jokes and they approved them, right? So that's why they were on the teleprompter when Norm did the jokes. The morning after the show, when there was a lot of controversy over some of Norm's jokes, ESPN acted like they were blindsided. How the hell could you do these jokes? I said, well, the jokes you're upset about, you realize you approved every one of them? So the answer is, yeah, comedy's dangerous. Sometimes you'll piss people off, and you guys just piss people off. But they wanted to act like they didn't have anything to do with the content.
I'm curious about this dynamic of being for broadcast TV versus really for the people in the room. So is that a big part of it? You're thinking about what a live audience will laugh at versus what'll play well on TV. If you're writing for the ESPYs, clearly it's about what's going to play well on television or any of the big awards shows. But are you thinking about the writers in the room when you're writing these shows?
I totally am. And obviously the writers in the room, that's a diverse group, right? There's television writers, there's film writers, the age range and everything else is very diverse, but they're still writers. So they're going to respond to certain jokes differently than a room full of actors or a room full of hip hop stars. So yeah, I'm very cognizant of who the audience is.
What kind of interaction do you have with the Guild when planning the award show?
So there's one person at the Guild, the communications director, whose job is to oversee my work and approve it. So I'm, in touch with them a lot. And then sometimes committee members, there's an award show committee at the Writers Guild. Sometimes committee members will reach out to me and say, hey, have you thought of this idea or this joke? So I am in touch with them, but in a good way. They sort of don't micromanage and trust me and my staff.
In your role, either as a WGA member or as the executive producer of the award show, how much do you pay attention to the race?
I pay attention a little, not a lot. It's sort of like the outcome doesn't mean so much to me as much as the nominees, because if I know who the nominees are, that gives me fodder for jokes and what possibly to make fun of. But ultimately, unless I were nominated myself for a Writers Guild Award, which has happened a few times in my career, but not recently, then it's not that I have so much stake in it.
Well, one potential contender this season looks to be the Jason Reitman movie Saturday Night about SNL, of course. Are you excited to see that?
I won't use the word excited. I would say I'm very intrigued. I've certainly read a lot of reviews, which I think it's fair to say at this point are mixed, but for sure, I'm intrigued to see it.
Any reflections on the institution that is SNL here on the 50th anniversary?
Sure. I hope that my invitation to the 50th party arrives very soon. They haven't apparently officially done that, but I did attend the 40th.
It'd be tough to get everyone in the room for that one.
Well, you can't. There's no +1, Ryland. I'm not allowed to bring a loved one. So that's how many people there. But, my connection to the show for 7 years, that's a long time. It's a legacy I'm proud of. And being at the 40th anniversary was really fun. So I'm assuming that being part of the 50th will be great as well.
So it's almost a cliche to say that every generation of SNL isn't as good as it used to be. So my question for you, Hugh, is SNL as good as it used to be?
Well, I'm going to give a diplomatic answer to that, Ryland, is that I don't agree that every generation or every cast or every rendition of SNL is equally good. I absolutely believe some are better than others. So I think I would leave it at that.
So Hugh, we like to end each of our interviews on the season with some lightning round questions. Are you game?
Totally. I dig it.
All right. What's your favorite award show to attend?
The Grammys. I love music, so to hear live musical performances.
Do you prefer Emmy season or Oscar season?
Oscar season. Emmy season is too confusing with Yom Kippur Rosh Hashanah season. It happens to always fall around the Jewish holidays.
Who is your all-time favorite award show host?
Ricky Gervais. He doesn't give a shit. He does jokes like we do on the Writers Guild Awards. Really laser beam focused, smart, topical, and he's unapologetic about it.
Who is someone you don't think would ever do it, but you'd love to have host your award show?
Vince Vaughn. In fact, I told Vince Vaughn to his face, I would want to produce him hosting a talk show. I think he'd be a great talk show host, and he'd be a great award show host too.
Are you more likely to cry or swear during an acceptance speech?
I would never, ever, ever cry. I would weep out of anger. So yeah, I would yell and scream. And believe me, Ryland, I've done it.
Do you have a post-awards season ritual?
Well, yes. I take my writers to a fancy steak dinner and we just decompress and have a great time talking about what worked, what didn't work. There's a lot of great drinking and eating.
Do you have a least favorite awards speech cliche?
Oh, that's a great question. My favorite cliche is for an actor or writer, someone to say, but folks, let me thank my greatest work, my two kids, Dylan and Willow.
Yeah, and then after they name check their kids, they always ask them to go to sleep.
They do that too, which is so nauseating.
All right, final question here, Hugh. What is one unreasonably early awards season prediction that you're willing to make?
Oh, okay. There's not going to be a Lifetime Achievement Award given this year to Harvey Weinstein. This is just my gut.
Take it to the bank. Great, Hugh. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a real pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to watching the Writers Guild Awards this upcoming season. Probably not on television, but you know what? I'll find it.
You'll find it. Thank you, Rylan. You did a great job, and I really enjoyed the lightning round. I'm feeling physically and mentally exhausted from it.
Thanks a lot, Hugh. We're back, and I'm with our FYCit field agent, Tony Miros, our resident FYC event junkie. Tony will be phoning in each week from the awards circuit to give us the scoop. So, Tony, what's been happening this week?
How you doing, Rylan? Well, it's revving up. As you know, the awards screenings are coming slowly but surely. I got to go check out an FYC for The Outrun with the star Saoirse Ronan. She's also producing the film. So I got to go see the screening, and then she was there in person to do the Q&A afterwards. It was actually quite interesting. It's a kind of very artsy kind of film. I know that it premiered in Sundance this past January, and now it's they're really going to try and push it for the Oscars, which, you know, she's already gotten 4 Oscar nominations.
So yeah, as these early screenings start to happen, not a ton seem to have big flashy events, but we are getting Q&As.
But aside from the films that are coming out slowly but surely, we do have some, you know, events with the TV end, because SAG Non-Com is actually doing all their screenings of the shows. So they're having big events with the stars and food. So I got to go to Hulu's La Máquina, which is a new Spanish-speaking television show on Hulu with lifelong friends Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna, who they originally, you know, they had done that film Y Tu Mamá También a decade ago, and now they've also been producing, and now they're producing this together. But it was very interesting because they had the screening. It was at Hollywood Athletic Club in Hollywood, which is that old building where they had the very first Emmy Awards. They had the screening, they had the actual premiere, the Q&A with them afterwards, and then there was a huge reception. So it was really great. There was served food, a huge bar. The stars were there. It was very showy, for sure.
Was it La Máquina themed bites afterwards?
Well, you would think. No, but it was very Mexican. It was lots of Mexican food. So we had lots of little Mexican. But, you know, I got to talk about, you remember how last time we talked about tips for the Hollywood Athletic Club? I've noticed that because it's a big space, they try to get all those hors d'oeuvres out to everybody out in the space. And they kept getting clogged at the kitchen doors because all those poor, servers are walking out the kitchen doors and everybody's attacking them at the door. I mean, if everybody can give them a minute, there were so many hors d'oeuvres. Like by the time we left, we were full. So there's like no reason to like get on top of them when they're leaving the kitchen because there was so much food. I can't even tell you.
Do you think the studios and networks do the past apps as opposed to like a buffet because they think it's classier, or it just makes more logistical sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's pluses to having the buffet, but then there are, the disadvantages because those lines get really long. I don't know about you, but I've been to the DGA where they have those buffets and those lines take forever. But they also sometimes they do both, right? They have past and they have the buffets. I think it depends on the actual space, because if you are in a smaller space, the past works better. If you're in a bigger space, you have the buffets. And if it's huge, like the DGA, you have them both. So I don't know what the theory is behind it, and I'd love to find out. So you should interview one of those event people so they can tell you all about it.
We'll work on that. All right. Well, so what's coming up this week?
Well, I am going to watch Conclave, another screening this week. I'm looking forward to that. That has a lot of heavy hitters. It's definitely Oscar worthy. I don't know much about it because, as I told you last time, I kind of like to go in blind. I mean, I know what a conclave is. I know it has to do with the Pope. I just don't know the elements to it. So I'm looking forward to that. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to the Lord of the Rings event at the London. It's a SAG-Nom-Com event. And it is the finale of season 2. So that should have lots of food and some of the stars. So I'll have a nice report for you next week.
Sounds great. I'm sure that one will be big and flashy.
Oh, yeah. And we love them big and flashy because this is Hollywood after all, you know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tony. Big thanks to our FYCit field agent, Tony Miros, and of course to Hugh Fink for the fantastic conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the season. Please leave us a review on your podcast app or drop us a line anytime at podcast@fycit.app. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend. Don't forget to follow us on social media at FYCit app. And be sure to visit our website, FYCit.app, where you can sign up for our newsletter, download FYCit, and stay up to date on all things award season. Thanks again for listening. We're excited to continue the journey, so join us next week for a new episode of The Season as we explore more of the stories behind the awards. Until then, remember, at FYCit, award season starts here.